The world is a pretty dangerous place these days. It seems like there's no shortage of bad news. We're witnessing a war in the Ukraine that Trump's trying to end. We've witnessed Middle East conflicts all of my life, and it certainly has heated up over the last 2 years. And now we've got a war on trade being conducted on the worldwide stage. Troy Anderson is here to help us sort it all out. He is the author of a best selling book. It is called The Trump Code: Exploring Time Travel, Nikola Tesla, and the Trump Lineage. Troy, welcome to The Truth.
Hi, John. It's great to be on your show.
I should also say that you are an award winning journalist, having been an editor of the Los Angeles Daily News for a number of years. And you also had a stint in Florida at Chrisma Media. So help us, tell us, are we in the best of times or the worst of times?
Well, I certainly think that since President Trump's reelection, we've seen a gigantic economic and spiritual turnaround in the world. We're seeing the world sort of come back into alignment here. But of course, this is a very tumultuous situation, as we've seen with the tariff war that's going on now. Everything he tries to do to turn things around, they're fighting him tooth and nail, just like they did in his first administration and in between his first and second administrations. I mean, we've never seen anything like this in probably American history that I can recall.
Well, I'm inclined to agree with you, and it's a quizzical to me why someone would want our tax dollars to go pay to counsel trans men on birth control. I mean, it's just like the craziest sort of things that I've ever heard of, and teaching mid Eastern journalists how the proper use of pronouns. And these are U.S. tax dollars. I mean, who is for this stuff? I mean, where is it coming from? And we're supposed to be. I guess we're not virtuous unless we buy into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's, just like the Bible said, evil will be called good, good will be called evil. I mean, we saw just how corrupt and wicked everything has become the last 4 years under the Biden administration. Just like you mentioned, these just absolutely crazy policies, wasting billions, tens of billions of dollars on these, just ridiculous, policies. And so now President Trump and Elon Musk, Department of Government Efficiency, and his team, they're discovering billions of dollars in waste, fraud, abuse. When I was a reporter at the LA Daily News, I covered county government, and that's pretty much all the story I ever wrote about was waste, fraud, and abuse at the county level. And now we're discovering just how gigantic this is at the national level. I wouldn't be surprised if our national debt may maybe somewhere be in the range of all how we've been ripped off for decades and decades by foreign countries, and just waste, fraud, and abuse. It's just mind-boggling how much money, taxpayer money, has been wasted here.
Well, if one thing Doge has taught us, it is that there is a complete lack of accountability for spending at the federal level. They can't even tell you where the money was appropriated, who authorized it. There are no memo lines on the checks that will help you decode it and unscramble this huge pile of spaghetti represented by trillions of dollars of spending. Um, Ben Franklin said, I think it was Ben Franklin, that they gave us a republic if we could keep it. It really feels like it's kind of tenuous to me right now.
Yeah, that's I've now written 7 books, exploring current events, how they might align with biblical prophecies, and I think we were. My last book with Pastor Paul Big is called Revelation 9:11, how the Book of Revelation intersects with today's headlines, and I think we were potentially on the verge of the events of Book of Revelation. I think God intervened. He's given us a second chance here to wake up and help turn things around, and now that effort is beginning, but. Just like Benjamin Franklin said, democracy, our republic is very tenuous. If we're not fighting to keep this freedom and liberty, I have many ancestors that fought in, World War II, Civil War, Revolutionary War, died, bled for this country. It's an ongoing fight to maintain freedom. There's many countries around the world becoming totalitarian, authoritarian, and democracies in retreat. And so we've got to fight to maintain this for our children and grandchildren.
I have a good friend, Judge Ginsburg, who has been on The Truth with us. He teaches a civics course on the PBS for the PBS network, and he's doing it because the schools are not doing it. And so I have this sort of suspicion that if you don't teach civics and American history and explain to kids how we got to where we are today, there's very little gratitude or even recognition of the sacrifices that you're describing that were necessary in order to secure our freedoms. So, like most spoiled children, they just sort of take it for granted and have an entitlement that this is just the way life is. It's really not, is it?
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. That's a big problem today with the younger generations. They're, the educational system has not taught them the history of our country and the cost it was paid to maintain this freedom and liberty. These polls that we've seen, 40, 50% of young people think that socialism and communism is a better system than capitalism. But, they've not been taught that, these socialists, even, Nazi Germany was a socialist country. These socialist and communist countries have resulted in the deaths, I think, anywhere from 100 million to 200 million people from starvation, execution, torture, everything you could possibly imagine. It's been a nightmare for the last, century and a quarter under these communist regimes. And so, why does everybody want to come to America and our freedom? People that come from communist countries come here and say, you're in danger. We almost saw essentially a socialist communist takeover of our country, this push for Marxism in the colleges and everything. And even at the federal government level, we came close to this, but like I said, I believe God intervenes, giving us another chance. And so, we need to educate our children on just how fragile these freedoms are.
Well, in South Florida, we've got a large South American influence. I'm sure that I'm not sure about Irvine, but I know that California's got their share of certainly illegal immigrants, being not a sanctuary city, but a sanctuary state, evidently. Um, and I have talked to people from Venezuela who've said that they were there when Venezuela used to be a beautiful, wonderful, democratically run country, and somewhere along the line, it became a communist ruled country, and that they are seeing deja vu all over again in the United States. How do we stop it? We've obviously taken a giant step forward in electing Donald Trump and turning to more conservative, real hardcore conservative leaders, as contrasted to rhinos. And don't even get me started on the progressive factions in our country. But what's your theory for maintaining our freedoms today?
Well, I think the most important thing, and we're seeing signs of this now, is we're seeing the younger generation returning to our Judeo-Christian roots. We're seeing a lot of these, like these secular colleges. There's thousands and thousands of young people getting baptized, becoming Christians across the country. And so, as this happens, I think we're going to see this spiritual turnaround begin and grow in America and throughout the world. It seems like there's been sort of a spiritual shift that's occurred since President Trump got elected. Not that he's a paradigm of virtue and morality, but I think God's sort of using some of the most unlikely people to turn things around. You see this story, throughout the Bible, and so I think that's the hope, is that we can have this spiritual turnaround, return to faith, our Judeo-Christian foundations, and then as people read the Bibles, they learn about American history, then they'll get on board with what God is doing, and what's been what's worked and been prosperous for America for over 2 centuries, and ever since the Pilgrims came here and dedicated America to the advancement of the Christian faith in the Mayflower Compact.
Well, Donald Trump is somewhat of a conundrum. I don't think that there are any perfect people on earth. But while he does have somewhat of a sordid past, I don't know that his marriages have shown a lot of endurance. But he doesn't drink. His children, to my knowledge, I know at least his two older sons are teetotalers. They're gainfully employed. It seems to me that he is, with the exception of his um, propensity to like the ladies, that he's led a pretty Christian life and is a pretty solid guy and certainly has raised a nice family. I think there's a lot to be able to celebrate there.
I've now written two books on President Trump. The first one is called Trumpocalypse. This latest one's the Trump Code, and I'm actually writing two more books on President Trump right now. And I watched this documentary not too long ago. Is that all the women in Trump's life, and they interviewed them, and they all spoke very highly of him. And I know that he's been going to church since he's a little kid. He went to church at Norman Vincent Peale's, the author of the Power of Positive Thinking. He grew up in that church. He loved going to Billy Graham crusades. I remember I would watch those with my dad when I was a kid. So, he's been up. I think he's a lifelong Presbyterian, and he is. He's done a lot to protect Christians, protect our values, and so. Yeah, well, none of us are perfect, and that's what the Bible makes clear.
So tell me about your tagline of your book. You talk about the about Nikola Tesla. What is that about, and how do you weave that into a study of Donald Trump?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is certainly the most unusual book I've ever written. So the Trump Code sort of puts together this 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle of how Trump fits in unfolding end time events. And one of the things we explore is what's called the Barron Trump collection. So there's a lawyer and author in the 1890s. He wrote this series of books. They're children's fantasy novels called the Barron Trump collection. It's at the Library of Congress. And there's been stories in Newsweek and Politico and Daily Mail on this for the last 8 years or so. And the picture of the boy on the cover of this book looks strikingly like President Trump's son, Barron. And he's guided by Don, the master of all masters. He lives in Castle Trump on Fifth Avenue in New York City, where Trump Tower now stands 130 years later. And they go on time traveling adventures. This is a children's fantasy novel. And so people have asked, is this somehow prophetic in nature, more maybe like, George Orwell's 1984, Big Brother and authoritarian state and that kind of thing. And then the Tesla connection. So the third book in the series is called The Last President. And so it says in this book, it says that this populist president is elected. It says the anarchists and the socialists converge on Castle Trump, shouting death to the rich man. And then there's protests and mayhem and all kinds of, chaos unfolds in America. And so now we've seen, President Trump get reelected. So it sort of seems like these books this guy wrote in the 1890s are coming true. And the Tesla connection. So Donald Trump's uncle is John Trump. He was a highly respected professor of physics at MIT. In the 1940s, when Nikola Tesla, the genius inventor, he was living hotel to hotel in New York City, and he had like 80 trunks of research. And so when he died, the FBI actually asked John Trump, President Donald Trump's uncle, to go look at all of Tesla's research, including ideas about time travel and possible all kinds of technologies we may have developed over the decades. And Trump's uncle came back and said, "Well, I don't think there's really anything of national security interest here." But then all these Tesla files went missing, and so the History Channel did a special not too long ago on the missing files of Tesla. And so the idea is that the government probably uses genius research from Tesla to invent all kinds of top secret weaponry and technologies over the decades, and possibly there could be some kind of connection to President Trump and knowledge his family may have into these top secret technologies. So that's something we sort of unpack in the Trump Code. It's
That is an
intriguing.
absolutely fascinating story and one that I had not heard. So let me ask you, in writing this book, did you glean any particular insights into the war in the Ukraine with Russia that maybe the mainstream media has not shared with us? Have you got a perspective that differs from the narrative at all?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that in the Trump or in the Barron Trump collection, the little boy Barron, guided by Don, they go to Russia. There's all these like trips to Russia, trips around the world. They meet with these world leaders, and it's interesting that President Trump has been able to meet with President Putin. He's met with the leader of North Korea. He's met with the leader of China, and Saudi Arabia, and that kind of thing. And so he sort of gets this open door. He develops fairly good relationships with these people, and hopefully that will be instrumental in helping bringing this terrible war in the Ukraine to an end. And he can hopefully negotiate some kind of peace that will resolve this situation. I mean, we've essentially come to the verge of nuclear war over the last few years with all kinds of threats from these highly dangerous nations. And so anything he could do to bring peace to the situation would certainly be a very good thing.
Troy, you hit the nail on the head for me. I have said, or on this program, every Saturday for about 6 months while we had the disaster of Joe Biden in the White House, who was encouraging the use of U.S. made munitions to be fired into the heartland of Russia. I felt it was the most reckless event that I've ever seen in my lifetime that absolutely had the potential to spark a nuclear war. And I just got down on my hands and knees and thank God that Donald Trump was elected president and could have and would put an end to the madness. I mean, when you talk about Trump meeting these other world leaders, isn't that his job?
Yeah. I mean, that certainly is his job. His job is to try to maintain as good a relations with other world leaders as possible. And as we saw, President Biden, he refused to meet with these other world leaders. So there was no diplomacy, there was no establishment of good relations, and so it's just common sense. The better friendship you have with somebody, the less likely they are going to kill you.
Well, I remember when I was a kid, we were really taught that we were supposed to dislike intently Nikita Khrushchev, who was the head of the Soviet Union. And then we've learned since then that Kennedy and Khrushchev actually had somewhat of a rapport with one another and that they back channeled each other while they were both the leaders of their respective countries. Now, Trump is criticized by the mainstream media and some of these liberal left lunatics that he had, and they try and subvert that into something that it's not. To me, they try and make it sound like something that's unseemly, that Trump would try and develop a relationship with the second, the owner of the second largest nuclear weapons on Earth. I say, isn't that a good thing? I mean, at least they can pick up the phone and call each other if things really get tense.
I actually took a class in college back in the '80s on nuclear war, and they detailed that we've come to the verge of nuclear war numerous times since the invention of atomic bombs. I think it's just the hand of God that stopped it from happening. Because I mean, think about it: human error occurs all the time. How have we not have managed to blow up the world in the last 80 years? So anything we could do to maintain good relations, you know, wisely maybe reduce some of the amount of nuclear weapons we have, so sort of reduce this threat of war in the world is a very wise thing to do. And President Trump is a peacemaker, and so yeah, the media. I used to be a member of the mainstream media, and it wasn't that bad back then, but it's gotten so bad now. It's just become sort of a propaganda arm of the deep state and Democrats. It's just a sad thing to see.
How do they pull that off? How do they co-opt? Obviously, well educated, smart people who have this God's gift that they've developed that can sit down and write a book or a 200 word, 800 word newspaper article. How do they win them over? And they seem to all be proxies of the left. And maybe I'm just blinded. Maybe there are conservatives that fall into that same category that we don't recognize. But it certainly seems like, you read about the uh, Robert Woodward. I got Woodruff on the brain. Woodward. I'm from Atlanta. Woodruff is a very prominent, iconic name in Georgia. But Bob Woodward, the author of the Watergate books and the leading detractor of Richard Nixon during that era, we now have found out that he never had a journalistic background. He just mysteriously showed up at the Washington Post and was assigned the most notable news story of the century. And then we find that he was a naval intelligence officer and had very close ties to the CIA. Surprise, surprise. How does it happen? How do they co-opt these people?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is something we've learned over the last few decades. Is a lot of the journalists, in America, throughout the world, actually are intelligence agents. They work for the CIA, different intelligence agencies like that. Um, I interviewed Jim Mars here a few years ago. He's a New York Times bestselling author. He was a reporter at the Fort Worth Star Telegram, and he told me that he had found out that all the large newspapers in America have CIA operatives on their editorial boards to sort of monitor things, keep a watch on the deal. And so, when I worked in newspapers for 20 years, small newspapers up to the LA Daily News, you just sort of, you gleaned from, talking to your editor, talking to other reporters in the newsroom, what's sort of permissible, what you can write about, what's sort of out of bounds. And that was, over 15 years ago. So imagine how much has changed now. Newspapers have been downsizing and laying off reporters and editors for about 15 years now. So I think there's been a big shift of journalists like myself, because I write for Newsmax, I write for the Christian Post, Town Hall, a bunch of conservative and Christian media outlets now. So it's probably been a big shift of Republicans and conservatives out of the mainstream media into the conservative media. And so that sort of leaves the mainstream media just with, Democrats and liberals and I guess intelligence operatives.
At any time in your career, did you ever feel like you'd been approached by someone that was trying to co-opt you and make you a proxy for the deep state?
Well, when my second book, the Trumpocalypse, came out, a CIA agent actually met with me. We had lunch together. He's a super nice guy, and he read Trumpocalypse, and he had all these like highly detailed, even theological questions that he asked me, and I figured it was all getting piped back to the headquarters. And so I just tried to answer it as truthfully as I could, but they didn't try to, he sort of hinted that if I went off the reservation, they could take me out, but I've never heard from him again.
You legitimately felt threatened by what he said to you over lunch?
It was a very subtle way he said it, but yeah, there was sort of an unspoken or a hinted threat there.
Do you remember the words that you could share with us?
Oh, I think he said something like, if we could come in and get you out of your bed in the middle of the night, take you to like a black ops site, something like that. But he didn't target at me, but he said that just in general, that's something they could do.
Well, that wasn't so subtle in my view. I get the message, and I'm clear across the country. But we also learned in unraveling of the Twitter files from Mike Taibbi that the FBI paid Twitter before Elon Musk bought it $3.4 million to cancel and censor people that said anything that didn't go along with the narrative on COVID and the vaccines. We've since learned that Politico received almost $10 million in subscriptions from the federal government. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm prone to share my Wall Street Journal with my wife and other members of my household. So I'm not sure why all the federal government people had to have their own private subscription to Politico, but it ranged almost, I think it was $8 or $9 million that the Biden administration paid Politico. And my guess is that's the tip of the iceberg, that money very much has been paid to make sure that people wrote what the government wanted them to write. And that's like I said the other day on the show, that's like finding out when I was a kid that there wasn't a Santa Claus. I mean, that's really devastating to learn to me.
A friend of mine, he freelances for just for like all kinds of major media outlets all over the world. And I had lunch with him a few years ago, and I said, what do you think is really going on here? He goes, Troy, I think pretty much everybody sort of bought off. This is back during the Biden administration. Everybody sort of bought off, paid off in some fashion, and I think there's a certain amount of truth to that. There's been a lot of that going on, but now we're seeing this big turnaround. We're seeing this pushback with President Trump and his team in office, and so it's very encouraging and hopeful to see this big turnaround that we're experiencing now.
Are you disappointed at all that there haven't been more disclosures, i.e., in the Epstein files? And do you think we've gotten all the Kennedy files? I mean, do you really feel like they've met their promises that they said day one they're going to release all this stuff? I'm kind of still waiting.
Yeah, I imagine President Trump's under a certain amount of constraints. Plus most of the people that work in the federal government, especially these intelligence agencies, have been there for a very long time. Many of them are part of the deep state. It's very, I'm sure it's very difficult to figure out who's who and try to root out the bad actors, that kind of thing. And so of course there's going to be a lot of pushback, releasing anything damaging, anything that might incriminate somebody. So it's going to be hard to get a lot of the real truth truth out of these agencies, of because they redact the stuff they don't want us to see.
Yeah, well, I'm inclined to agree with you, and I think they're finding out that it's a lot easier to criticize government than it is to actually be a part of the governing. I'm sure it's a complicated Rubik's Cube, just like we're watching play out with the tariffs. Any, in our last few minutes remaining here, any insights into President Trump's high wire act on trying to impose tariffs and not crash our economy in the process?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we just got to remember he's the author of The Art of the Deal. And, America's been ripped off for decades and decades with these unfair tariff situations, the free trade agreements. And so he's trying to turn this around. He's trying to attract manufacturing and businesses back to America. Much of our country has been hollowed out and decimated by the loss of these, auto companies and many different manufacturing companies throughout our country. And this has hurt our economy. And so what he's doing now is going to help turn that around, restore the nation, and he's going to do unpredictable things like we've just seen the last few days. But today he's saying let's negotiate with all these countries that want to negotiate. So hopefully we'll get better deals with many countries. China's going to be obstinate, but many countries are coming to the table, and so I think he's a master negotiator. My literary agent likes to say he's a master magician. And, look over here, look over there, but I think it's going to work out in the long run.
Well, you and I see it the same. I think that he had to take a tough line and he had to scare the bejesus out of these people to get them to actually come to the negotiating table. I think they kind of fall into three categories, really. You've got our allies who have become, and I point to the EU when I say that, much like spoiled children who have been spoiled for the last 50 years and now we're taking away the allowance and they don't like it. And then you've got people like China who really have been trying to undermine us while taking the money that they've made off of us to build their military and the vast machine that they've created. And so I think Trump is trying to rein all of that in. And I do analogize it to a high wire act. It is he said it's like playing 1,000 Super Bowls, actually. And I just so appreciate what he is doing. But while he scared the bejesus out of our trading partners, he flat out scared the bejesus out of me. And I'm just hoping that he'll figure out how to right the ship without wrecking it. And I think he will. And I'm just so grateful for you to come on with us today. Troy, where do we buy the book, The Trump Code?
Yeah, so the Trump Code's become a number one bestseller. It's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, or you can go to my website. It's troyanderson.us, and we all have all kinds of great newsletters you can sign up on there also.
Well, I will definitely do that. And the book that you also referenced, The Time Travel of Barron Trump, did you say you got to go to the Library of Congress to find it?
Oh yeah, no. You can order the Barron Trump collection also on Amazon and actually read these children's fantasy novels from the 1890s. It's sort of like this is like the time of the popularity of Alice in Wonderland. So those are pretty fascinating too. In fact, the third book I reread it again last night, and it ends with the destruction of Washington D.C. So let's certainly pray that doesn't happen at some point.
Well, we don't want to end Washington, D.C., we just want to tame it. And I think that's what we're watching right here in real time. So thank you so much, Troy Anderson. And we really appreciate your time. I hope you come back soon and have a great rest of your weekend.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great honor.